This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
Hey cannabis consumers, have you ever consumed a cannabis product thinking it'll make you feel a certain way, but then it doesn't? Don't you wish you had a clear understanding of your own DNA so that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that best aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the knowledge and power and capability to purchase products that best align with your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA Collection Kit and Endo Decoded Report at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Jesse Redmond, what is going on, man?
I'm excited to be here, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for accepting to come on the show. Before we recorded, so that everybody has some background here, once again, the Twitter community comes through. The cannabis community within Twitter, it's incredible. Jungle Java, shout out to Jungle Java. She tweeted about Jesse Redmond here and how he was, just a great person to follow within the cannabis, community. And you got a pretty compelling story also, man, of how you got into it. So I think that's probably a good place to start. I know, that your dad had some chronic pain. You've been in investing for basically all your life, right? In California. And your dad had some chronic pain problems. So, and he eventually turned to cannabis. Tell us about that whole process and, what the outcome was of him, switching over to medicine that's cannabis.
Yeah. So my dad's pain problems have been like kind of a big part of my life in a weird way. In 1987, he was in a car accident where somebody came across the median and smashed his car into a bus. And from that, he had a bunch of back and neck problems. That's kind of the easiest way to describe it.
Wow.
And that evolved into something called CRIPS, which stands for chronic regional pain syndrome. So from the time I was in high school, my dad hasn't worked, and he, kind of forcefully went on disability when he was like 47 years old and kind of never got better. And so there's people that get into similar accidents, but they get better, but his kind of got worse and turned into this regional pain syndrome where he, not so much like you have an injury they can't fix, but you just have this kind of phantom pain that moves around your body. And the result is that he was at a level, 8 or 9 pain pretty consistently.
Wow. And that affects everything, right? I mean, day-to-day living, well-being, sleep, I would imagine, all the above.
Yeah, you got all of it. It made my mom effectively his caretaker, kind of shut down her life. We were living in Minnesota at the time, and my dad was seeing a doctor in Santa Barbara. And once he retired from his job in Minnesota, they moved to Santa Barbara to be closer to that doctor. And that's kind of how I ended up out here on the West Coast as opposed to where I grew up in Minnesota. But in terms of treating his pain condition, opiates for a long time were considered state of the art. And we were told that they fixed pain, and we were even told that they weren't addictive. And so that was the route. You're in a ton of pain. There's a bunch of things we can try. We try all of those. Those don't work. We go on opiates. And he ended up, on big prescriptions of first morphine and then into OxyContin, for the better part of, 20 years or so.
Is that true that they said it was even non-addictive and
Correct.
It was good for you? I mean, and this is approved by the FDA, right? I mean, it has to go through all the rigorous process. And so at the beginning of the opioid kind of, I guess, introduction, you're saying that that's what they were saying. That's what they were.
Yeah,
stating.
I wouldn't say they were saying it was good for you, but they were not saying it was addictive. That wasn't stated as a concern.
Yeah.
And so it was seen, originally as this really great, pain killing thing, right? And it does work well for killing pain initially, but eventually you build up a big tolerance to it. There's evidence that shows that over time, pain gets worse from opiates because your body craves the opiate, so it creates pain to get more of that opiate. And the opiate essentially kind of takes over your life and takes over your body. But if you have real pain problems, it's not like you can say, oh, I just don't want to do this anymore, right? Because you're going to go
Right.
through wicked withdrawal and you're going to have no pain control. So you're kind of stuck in this area. He tried a bunch of other stuff. He had like electrical stimulator implanted that's still in his body. He had a morphine pump implanted because that was supposed to be a better way to do it, to drip the morphine right onto like your spinal cord or something, as opposed to taking oral pills and things like that.
Wow.
And even did ketamine treatments, which you might have heard of, which have a range of applications, usually associated with depression or things along those lines, but give some people some chronic pain relief. Didn't do much for him. And so he'd kind of been in this rut for a long time. Meanwhile, in 97, I graduated school from UCSB, and I was aggressively pursuing this hedge fund track, which I can kind of get into more later if people are interested in it. But it was, kind of finishing out his experience with the chronic pain. When it was about 2015, 2016, the situation became pretty unmanageable. And you can't just keep taking more of these opiates. And we're actually entering a period now where doctors are prescribing less of the opiates, and there's real strict regulations around how much you can get prescribed to you for, obvious reasons, because the excess prescriptions fueled the, OxyContin problems out there.
Yeah,
And
it's about time, right? I mean,
yeah, it's about time, unless you have real pain problems, right?
right, exactly. I mean, I've
tricky.
lived through the era where like you break your leg on the football team and you're prescribed 60 Oxycontins for 2 months, and then you fall into that cycle, like you mentioned, of just needing more, where your addiction grows, right? I mean, it could lead to heroin eventually, which in most cases it does. So,
and so in his case, he, my family still lives in the Santa Barbara area, and he got in touch with a real cannabis doctor in Los Angeles, as opposed to the fake cannabis doctors who just write you a medical cannabis prescription. This was somebody that actually, had a plan and things for him to try. And she originally suggested trying some tinctures that were a combination of CBD and THC. There's something called the entourage effect, where kind of 1 + 1 = 3 if you combine those two. So he got in some THC-rich tinctures that had some CBD. And originally he was into just smoking flower, and that was working fine for him. And through these two things, the flower for more immediate pain relief and taking some tinctures throughout the day, he was able to cut his opiate use, in half within, let's say, the first 6 months. And after a year, he was down to off 90% of what he was on before. And the quality of his life, I would say, improved by like 50%.
wow.
I'm not gonna say he's pain-free,
Sure.
but maybe rather than being at an 8 or a 9 and taking a bunch of toxic pills, he's at a 5 or a 6, sometimes 2, 3, or 4, especially in the mornings. And he's doing things to his body that are so much less harmful. And he's just a more chill guy overall. Like people on opiates are sometimes a little bit tough to deal with. There's a lot of ups and downs. People that are stoned aren't so hard to deal with. And so if he's had some medicine, so to speak, he might be a little spacier, a little hungrier, all that sort of stuff. But he's overall, improved, his whole life and his whole relationships. And so it was through this experience, I went to college at UCSB. I spent 2 years in Boulder as well. And so, I've always been a recreational user. I've generally preferred at night, to have some flower instead of, drink beers or drink wine. That's kind of long been my preferred route. But I was never interested enough in cannabis to really, really care about it. I'd never grown. I'd never, I never thought of dedicating my life to it in any manner. But when I saw this going on with him, I saw such a profound change, and I saw this big momentum in California. Go ahead.
And I just want to ask, what was the time, like what was the time period, the longevity of like you seeing your dad progressively get better by using cannabis regularly?
I would say this was 2015 when it started, and I left the finance stuff in 2016. And that fall started a collective.
So one year.
I probably witnessed it for maybe 6 months and was like, wow, this is interesting.
Wow.
At that same time, it's important to point out that California was going from medical to adult use cannabis on the ballot. So I was also watching that going on. And at the same time, it was getting harder to do hedge fund stuff in Santa Barbara and in general in California. It's not a real mecca for hedge funds. And so that was kind of getting more difficult. Cannabis was becoming increasingly part of the California scene. My dad was starting to feel a heck of a lot better. And I kind of felt like, and I still do, that I know a secret other people don't. And that secret is how effective it really is as a medicine. It's easy to hear that and kind of roll your eyes, or you hear it and you're like, okay, cool story. But when it's your dad and you've actually seen it work, and then you start a collective and you start helping a whole bunch of other people, hundreds, actually, over 1,000 other people, and you see it working for them, you're like, oh my gosh, everyone else is going to figure this out. And I know it first because I've been dealing with it firsthand. So it's kind of that confluence of events. I'm not a religious guy, maybe call me spiritual at times, but I kind of feel like that's where my life was supposed to go. And I think it was that kind of that confluence of seeing my dad get better, the hedge fund stuff getting more difficult, California moving, more and more towards, full adult use. And I thought, wow, maybe this is something that I can do for that second half of my life, and also make the fundamental switch from greed, which is hedge funds, to helping people. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate trifecta there. I mean, all signs are pointing one way, right? It would kind of be off to dismiss that, right? So it's amazing that you followed that path. And so, first off, a couple of questions before we actually talk about your entrance, and that is, you mentioned finding the legit doctor, right? And that's so true what you mentioned, because in California, I know in Colorado and other places, like these more mature states, for the medicinal programs are so big and they cover so many ailments that it's just so easy, right? To go in, ask a doctor for a prescription or a license. You pay them $250, whatever the cost is, you get your license, you're good to go. And when you say real doctor, first, my question is, how difficult is it really to find, someone within healthcare that actually understands the endocannabinoid system and how, the cannabinoids, basically interact with our system, right? And then tell us like what the education process was like when you met with that doctor.
So I've never met the doctor. I've talked to her over Zooms, and I've participated on conference calls with her. My parents have gone down to Los Angeles, but I've actually never met the doctor. I would say the biggest difference is that when you're talking about like the California medical system, which was in effect basically 2000 through 2018, kind of into 2019, depending on how you look at the laws. But going from the late 90s up until, let's call it 2018, California was a medical state governed by something called Prop 215. And that meant that you had to have a medical card in order to go to a dispensary. What getting a medical card entailed was paying $29.95 and going to nugmd.com and filling out a form saying you have anxiety, pain, or any other qualifying condition. Click that box, pay $29.95. They email you the card, then you bring that card with you to whatever dispensary you go to. So it was cool that it gave people really easy access, as I feel like everyone should have access to cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't a doctor who was going to say, here's how to use this. Here's a strain that might be helpful. Here's a tincture versus an edible. Here's a dosage that might be appropriate, right?
The science, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was hard to find someone that was serious about it, because there's not much of a business model around that for, quote, real doctors, because it's not that widely accepted right now. So insurance won't pay for those visits. The doctor has a hard time getting paid off the medications, because they're usually just they might tell you to use a Papa and Barkley prescription, but they don't have any deal with Papa and Barkley to endorse those things. They can't really create their own products. So it's kind of tricky for them to create a business model around it. So there's not a lot of them. It's hard to find a good one, but this one was really helpful. I always started them small in terms of like, not getting them scared away by eating a 250 milligram brownie and going into a black hole for 3 hours, but instead was like, start small in the tincture, and, start small in the flower and kind of work your way up. And over time now, through experience, he's able to handle, most of his needs. I still help him get a ton of his products just because I'm more knowledgeable and more comfortable, going to dispensaries and doing that stuff for him. But they've definitely come up the education curve, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Okay. So now let's talk about your entrance. So, from my understanding, I know that you're a cannabis dispensary owner, right? So was that the first move in your journey?
Yeah, so in 2016, in California, in the medical program, it was surprisingly easy to start a collective. You just had to have some of the right documents in place, some of the right agreements in place, and follow certain guidelines for signing people up, using proper paperwork, getting their signature. There were some rules about how many members you could have to your collective and those sorts of things, but it was pretty easy to get started. And so I had some friends in Santa Barbara that were involved in growing. You know, keep in mind, Glass House is in Santa Barbara. That's not who I was friends with at the time, but I did have friends that were involved in this kind of sun-grown mixed light type harvests like Glass House does. And I
Right.
just bring up Glass Houses because it shows what an ideal environment Santa Barbara is to grow.
Totally.
So I
And
had some friends.
shout out to Graham Ferrara, by the way,
Yeah,
of Glass House.
absolutely. And so I reached out to a couple of them and I just started small. I got a listing on Weed Maps. I think we paid $400 at the time to be the 15th listing in our region. I think there were 26 listings at the time in our region. So there's 4 cities that we were able to cover. And I started super small. I just had 7 strains of flower. I had 3 kinds of concentrates and 3 homemade edibles my mom baked every week for us.
Nice.
And I initially, personally went out and signed up every single member and was doing it all by myself to start.
What was the edible that your mom baked?
It was brownies, banana bread, and Rice Krispie treats.
That's great. Man.
Yeah.
Cool. So you
Any-
kept the family family in there somewhat, with your mom, and of course your dad being kind of the example of the
Yeah,
efficacy.
he was always the test case, and my mom did the baking, and then my sister helped out with some delivery. She lives in the area, and then we fortunately, got busier because there's not a lot of people at that time in the cannabis delivery and dispensary business that were super professional about it. Like, I love stoners and I consider myself a stoner, but I'm a pretty responsible stoner. Meaning if I say I'm going to show up on time, I'll be there, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I'll keep the menu updated, and I'll work hard. And that wasn't always the case. So we kind of stood up pretty quickly. And I think in the first year signed up over 1,000 patients, something along those lines.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, I'm having success doing this. And that made it so much easier just to keep committing, right? If it sucked and we weren't making any money and it wasn't fun and I didn't enjoy it and we we're struggling, it would have been easier to retreat, right? But since it was going well, it was just like, okay, let's build the menu more, 50 items, 75 items, over 100 items. Let's add drivers. And my mom became a driver. And my mom has never smoked weed in her life. And she was about 70 years old at the time.
Wow.
So we had this delivery business where rather than having some kind of, maybe sketchy looking stoner dude come up to your house with your order that was super nondiscreet and maybe a little bit intimidating, you had my 5'1", 70-year-old mom doing the delivery. So someone's grandma was delivering the weed to you, which was super low key, and everyone liked her.
Right.
So it was a. I think the older I get, the more I'll look back and say, wow, that was kind of a really cool, special, fun time.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you don't get those times back. And that is such an amazing time, it sounds like, to go through, especially with your family, right? The people that you're closest to and who know you the best,
Yeah.
all working together. And it's rewarding too, right? Like you mentioned, like there's patients when they discover cannabis, whether it be, THC or CBD products, it can be life-changing, just like how you explained with your dad. And it's just something where if they can get a hold of it, like I've seen CBD operators that just sell online and they're looked at as like angels by some patients, right? Just because of how much the products have improved the well-being of those people's lives. And they just rant about them. I love this person. They do wonders and their products are great. And there's, it's just amazing, man. So congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks. And so we did that, when I say pretty successfully, I'm still talking, small scale and, not one of the leading, collectives in California. But to me, it was going really well. In 2018, we adopted something called Prop 64 in California, which is the adult use legislation. And that all sounded pretty cool, but it really changed things a lot in terms of the rules around what you had to have in terms of where you kept the cannabis, how you could deliver the cannabis, how much cannabis you can keep in your car, and most effectively, the taxes. And so it went from something
So
that
that was the start, right? The start of the bad
yeah,
legislation in California.
yeah, and so right. So here we are, and things are a proper mess. And I'm so grateful that I didn't convert to doing something that was a Prop 64 dispensary, because I would probably be out of it by now and have failed, or super deeply in debt over it. So it was a blessing to have kind of
Yeah.
dropped out. I think we did it for about 3 years or so. And it was towards the end of that period when I was, looking at, where we could move that would be Prop 64 compliant, what that business plan would look like, how much it would cost to get those licenses, right? Because just that process is typically a 6-figure affair and can take over a year or longer.
Right.
And it kind of dawned on me at that point, during that period when I stepped away from the investing stuff and into the cannabis stuff, I really left the investing stuff behind. And I know on Twitter, somebody asked some question about how operating a dispensary changed my opinion about cannabis stocks. And during that period, I really didn't care about them. I wasn't thinking about finance. I was just so committed. I was growing personally just to learn about the plant. I was, the dispensary was open 6 days a week. And I just kind of tend to go all in on stuff. And there's a saying that I saw online the other day that was something like, to move into your new life, you have to leave your old life behind. It was more clever, more articulate way of saying
Sure.
it. But just that if you want to hang out of the hedge fund stuff, you're probably not going to be great at the cannabis stuff. And
That's
so
a
I had to
fact,
get,
man. You gotta
yeah,
laser focus. You're absolutely right. So you kind of just shut it off. You had to put
totally.
that aside for a while. Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah.
I didn't open the stocks app on Apple. I just moved away from it. And it was when it looked like we weren't going to transition to doing the Prop 64 thing in California, and I was kind of trying to figure out what we might do next, or what I might do next, that's when I kind of thought, wow, there's an intersection here of cannabis and investing. And this really kind of seems like that might be the end point, is blending those two things.
Yeah. And that leads us to today, which, I mean, the entire market is down, right? Obviously, there have been a number of catalysts to make it kind of a bear market situation at this point. But before we get into the current environment, let's talk about green giants.
Yeah. So Green Giants, the first investing thing I did was start something called Higher Calling LLC. And that's that's a consulting business. When I was in the hedge fund industry, most of my relationships, most of the money that I managed came from high net worth individuals and family offices. And if anyone can invest in cannabis, it's more those sorts of folks rather than institutions right now in terms of where the money's coming in. And so I opened Higher Calling to help high net worths and family offices I knew access appropriate cannabis investments. And I had friends too that were trying to do the Prop 64 thing and trying to do the California vertically integrated thing like Glass House does, where they have the dispensaries, they have the manufacturing, they have the grow, and they put all those three things together in a vertically integrated manner. I had some friends up the coast that I was trying to help do the same things with their businesses, and at the same time trying to find private investments for my high net worth and family office clients. That was a great entrance, and we had some successful deals. But overall, it was kind of a mess. These private deals are super slow moving, and it really turns into a lot of politics and just a bunch of building code challenges and license challenges, and it's just a really sticky situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started moving more towards public equities. And we're so new in these cannabis stocks, and a lot of them are so small and so volatile that you don't really need to dig down into venture capital or private equity to get potentially really compelling returns.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, someone looking at something like private equity is looking to get kind of a stocks on steroids effect, where they're looking to magnify their returns. Because over a long time periods, venture capital, private equity return streams look a lot like stocks, just about 50% more volatile. Yes, I know there are some ones that do different things, but broadly speaking, it's kind of a stocks on steroids type scenario. And with these stocks, they don't need steroids. They're plenty volatile and have a lot of upside, on their own, as we've been seeing, a lot of downside on their own, as we've been seeing lately. And so I started with my consulting clients. I started building portfolios of largely MSOs. And I was doing this, they would pay, consulting type rates for custom portfolios. And so one of them said, well, why don't you try to get, funding for something like an ETF or a mutual fund, or start some sort of fund structure like I've managed before around this. And I said that, that would be cool, but I don't think I can round up, that kind of capital in short order. And there's a lot of hurdles and challenges to becoming, MSOS or, PSDN. Those are not easy things to accomplish. So someone suggested, I didn't know anything about writing newsletters, but somebody said, why don't you try the newsletter model where you can have a free newsletter where you write about stuff. And then you can have a premium newsletter where maybe you'll give people the positions in the Green Giants portfolio and they'll pay you something monthly for that information. Kind of like Alan does with 420 Investor. That's not exactly what Alan does with it, but there are premium services out there, like that. And so I started on the Ghost platform, which is a blogging platform, and it was an integrated premium newsletter option. I launched mid-September, and within 3 days, Stripe, the payment processor, canceled my account for cannabis-related content.
Oh gosh!
But
another casualty of censorship within the cannabis space.
And to make it worse, I had people that had signed up for a year subscription, so I can't leave it, meaning that I'm kind of married to that site because I have legacy subscribers, and Stripe is the only payment option that integrates with Ghost. So now I essentially lost the business model associated with the newsletter, and I'm just writing, free cannabis stuff on Green Giants. So the intent with Green Giants was to have it what it is now, but it used to have a button on the top that said premium, where for it was $29.95 a month, you would get holdings and trade updates of the Green Giants portfolio. So I still write the investor letter, which you'll see on there. There's a December investor letter people can read.
Let me bring it up because I was going to share my screen. I'm on your website right now. 1 second here. So that those actually watching the podcast can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So we're on the home page here, and just go ahead and kind of walk us through like whatever you want to walk us through.
Yeah, so those last two articles have been by far the most popular. There's a reason like sites like Seeking Alpha write things that are really stock specific because people want to talk about individual stocks as opposed to more top-down personal stories. And so writing these ones about Verano, Curaleaf, and there's also one on Schwaz, have been the most popular things. This Verano one, I think, is the most popular thing I've ever written in my life. Todd Harrison retweeted it. Jungle Java shared it. It showed up a few other places on the internet. So that one I'm pretty proud of. If you go back up just a touch, there you go. Green Giants December 2021 newsletter. You click on that for a second.
Yeah.
So I write this in a manner where it's like I'm managing the Green Giants fund, which I am for myself and for consulting clients and for premium subscribers. If you scroll down, I compare the performance of what I'm doing with the Green Giants strategy. Just go up a touch more, and you'll see it compared to other direction. Sorry,
this way right here, right?
Down a little more.
Might be delayed a little bit.
Okay, there's a table below that shows the performance. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. And so see, during this month of December, my portfolio, the Green Giant strategy, lost 1.65%, which isn't great, but did a little bit better than some of the benchmarks out there. Then I go on to explain it. So for people interested in this kind of stuff, I'd say Green Giants is doing two things right now. One is talking about MSOs, in particular ones that might be interesting, like Verano or Curaleaf. But you can also follow the progress of the Green Giants strategy and how a portfolio of just MSOs, a concentrated portfolio of MSOs, is doing compared to these other options that might be much more diversified across other stuff. And so that's kind of my investment thesis, is a focused portfolio of MSOs is likely to outperform all this other stuff that's full of Canada ancillaries and other things that don't matter.
Yeah. Well, I love, the passion and the all the insights that you're providing, especially because it's unfortunate with the Stripe situation, man. The monetization aspect, but I hope you figure that out soon. And I did want to ask you, I know there is this hyper focus on the MSOs, which, of course, are the leaders, I would say, within the global cannabis industry at this point, right? That they're just kind of the dark horse that no one's really heard about because of the fact that they're not listed on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, right? So in your thesis and kind of in your research, do you only focus on the tier 1 MSOs? We're talking, I saw the Curaleafs, the Veranos, Cresco, and of course there's others, or Terracent, or excuse me, True Leaf. But do you focus on the tier 2s or tier 3s, or is it all tier 1 focused?
Yes, so I'm open broadly, I would say, to looking at the top 15 in terms of market cap with the MSOs. When you get into names 10 through 15, there's a couple of issues. One is liquidity. Take something like Schwaz, just doesn't trade a lot of shares. Glasshouse is great, doesn't trade a lot of shares, pretty small stock. If you get into so I'd say tier 3s are a little more challenging for me. And I also think if we don't get safe banking, that those tier 3s are more likely to have problems with financing and higher interest rates.
Right.
And so someone like Schwaz just did a debt deal at 13%. Someone like Curaleaf just did a debt deal at 8%. So 50% more expensive for a tier 3 versus for a tier 1. And so for that reason, I'm not currently involved in any what I'll call tier 3s, let's number 10 through 15. So broadly speaking, I don't disclose exactly what I hold because people have paid for that information, and I don't feel like that would be real respectful to them. But I can say that I own 7 positions. 5 of them are in the top 6 names, and then a couple that are a bit below that. In those couple mid tiers that are a bit below that, I'm looking for things that have more exposure to the East Coast. If you look at catalysts that might go on this year, maybe we'll get political stuff. We can't count on that, but it seems pretty likely New Jersey at some point is going to get their act together and flip to adult use. And that's an exciting thing for people like, Verano, Terrace, and there's a bunch of ones that have exposure. Ascend is in a wrestling match over some East Coast licenses right now. So leaning into that East Coast exposure, and also the possibility that some of those companies are going to get acquired. And so if you're one of the 5 billion players out there, your Curaleafs, your True Leaves, your GTIs, buying someone, whether it's Air, whether it's Jushi, whether it's Ascend, even something smaller than that, I think is definitely possible. So I have about 80% of my portfolio in 5 of the 6 biggest names, and I have 20% of the portfolio in a couple of the what I'll call more mid-tier names.
Well, I mean, the transparency on the website is great. Like you mentioned, you're showing, where exactly you're at within your own portfolio. And so what's the end game for Green Giants? I mean, where do you go from here?
And I don't think I know that. And I think I'm kind of got to be okay with that. There's relatively easy things to do. Like you could use Patreon to create some sort of a business model around it. And now it might bring in a couple of bucks, and might be a fun thing to do to at least get compensated for doing that kind of work. Maybe deep down inside, I hope it turns into something that is a fund or an ETF or something down the line. Maybe it evolves into working with somebody else on another project. I don't feel real confident saying what I think Green Giants will turn into, but I think I feel really good about what it is right now. And I feel
that's great. I think that I know I asked the question, but if you don't have a definite answer and you're just enjoying what you're doing and you're adding value, then it's going to morph into whoever it needs to be, right? I mean, you're obviously providing value and adding, a level of insight that people within the community and the industry don't really know or even aware of at this point. So that's great.
And so right now it's providing, much more exposure than I ever imagined, especially in the last, month or so, as I've written some things that have gotten to be more popular. You can subscribe on the website, and so it'll send you emails of any articles that are written. And subscribers have tripled this month. Views are up 5x this month. And also just the kind of the quality of conversations I'm having around it have been great. It's awesome to talk to people like you. I got a DM from the CEO of one of the top 10 companies out there saying he'd like to chat and be happy, if we wanted to talk about, covering, I don't know what the right way to say it is, but he was interested in having a conversation about his stock if I was interested, basically in a way of saying like, it would be nice to, if you wanted to write an article, we'd be happy to do an interview or whatever, would be helpful. And so just to be able to have those quality of conversations and make those kind of connections is exciting. And so I'm not totally confident of where it will go, but I feel like the trajectory of it is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
no,
and also in that is, I don't know where cannabis stocks are going to go, right?
that was
If
going
you
to be my next question. I was going to be like, what does the market look like? I mean, you talked about catalysts earlier, right? Like, there's so many potential catalysts, and I keep hearing people call the bottom. I mean, are we there? Like, what is going on? You know?
yeah, I think everyone's gotten a turn at least once at calling the bottom now. I've been involved in enough markets. I guess I joined Franklin Templeton. It was my first job in 1997, so that was 25 years ago. So I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and I've learned that I'm not great at timing markets. And so I think more often than not, you just get humbled through those experiences when you stick your neck out. And so my approach is a little bit different in that I'm trying to build a portfolio that has the greatest probability of outperforming in a variety of different scenarios. So if we get safe this year, and if we're in a bull market, I think that if we get safe, that'll bring more investors in. I think if more investors come in, they're going to look for the most proven, most liquid stocks, because they're not going to be looking to dip into the 10s through 15s and smaller stuff because it's already so new to them. If you're making your first cannabis investment, the chances you're going to end up in Forefront Ventures or Planet 13, these really small, couple $100 million stocks, is probably pretty low. You're probably going to say, well, why don't I start out with something blue chip like a GTI or Verano or a Trulieve, where there's much more liquidity and a little bit less volatility and a higher probability probably of having success with it. Maybe once you get really good, you want to dip down into that small stuff to earn some additional alpha. But I think in that, even if we get safe and we have, let's say, a good market environment, I think the tier ones have a strong possibility of outperforming. If we don't get safe and we get into a bear market, in all other stocks I've been involved in, quality and size holds up better in a bear market. And so the smaller stocks that are less liquid tend to get sold harder and get creamed, and the bigger stuff does better. So that's better for the tier ones. If we don't get safe, and cannabis stocks don't get that catalyst, the tier ones are getting the financing at 8% that we just talked about. The tier threes are in the low teens. So it's also a better environment if we don't get safe for the tier ones, and you might see them cashed up and going on acquisition sprees of these smaller ones. So I think that kind of regardless of the environment, we're at a time in the evolution of cannabis stocks and cannabis investing that the greatest probability of success and the greatest risk-adjusted returns are going to be in the bigger ones. And I think that if somebody blindly, put 20% in each of the top 5 and checked it once a week or even just once a month, I think that has every probability of doing better than a guy that's glued to his screen and trying to be tricky all day.
I think that's very sound advice, my man. I couldn't agree with you more, Jesse. And as we close out here, I would be remiss to not mention that you are also the host of CEO of Interviews, which you co-host with my dear friend Rena Sherbel, who's going to be on again very soon. And so, yeah, man, tell us a little bit about that podcast. Tell them where they can find you, and all that. Like, it's your time to close.
Yeah, so CEO interviews has been super fun. I've just known Rena from her doing the Cannabis Investing podcast, which has long been one of my favorite things to listen to on car rides and when I go for walks. And she just put out something on LinkedIn saying she was working on a new project and was looking for some people that were interested. So I just sent her a message, learned a bit more, and she created this really cool show on Seeking Alpha. It's actually not a podcast; it's a video show, kind of like we're doing here. It was on YouTube for a while, but now it's just on Seeking Alpha.
Okay.
And we interview CEOs of publicly traded companies. So that's kind of the hard criteria: is you have to be publicly traded. And there are some other screens that we use to find things that we think will garner an audience. We don't want to be in super small stuff nobody cares about. So we try to interview interesting companies. I interviewed the CEO of Schwaz, which is an MSO I actually wrote about recently, Justin Dye, and that'll be out in a week or so. I've interviewed Abner Curtin, CEO of Ascend. I've interviewed Jason Wild, who I think you've talked to,
yes,
as well, from TerraSend. I did a joint interview with him and Fabian from Gage about their merger. And so there's a ton of cool cannabis content, which is really great. And I always look forward to, but we also talk about other stuff. So last week I was in a conversation about the metaverse with an augmented reality company. The week before I was talking to an electric vehicle manufacturer that's doing really cool stuff. So there's a bunch of interesting interviews. I tend to do about one a month on cannabis content, and then the rest will be covering some other sectors. So that's been super fun. my colleague at Seeking Alpha just did one on Glasshouse. I know we brought that name up several times. So if you're into that, just go over to seekingalpha.com, type in CEO interviews in the search box, and it'll pull up all of those. I think for the cannabis fans out there, the ones with Abner, the one with Jason, and the one coming out with Justin from Schwaz are things I think people will like. Outside of that, in terms of plugging my stuff, Green Giants is obviously something I'm excited about and proud of. That's at greengiants.net. I'd be super excited if you would subscribe, just because that helps make sure the content stays in front of you. I try to write something at least once a week. The last two were Curaleaf and Verano, so you might check those out. And if you have more specific cannabis investing needs, I do, through my entity called Higher Calling, do custom portfolios and consulting around cannabis investing. So whether you have a portfolio and you just want to, talk about it and get some advice, or whether you're interested in doing something custom, I do all of those things. So I'd say, the CEO interviews, the greengiants.net. And if you have more specific needs, you can, reach me on the website or reach me on Twitter, and happy to chat about those.
You heard it first from Jesse Redmond himself. I will also put those links and that information in the YouTube description box so everybody has it. So thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure. You're super knowledgeable, and really enjoyed it. As things develop, we're kind of in a holding pattern right now, and the bottom's coming, I think. But when that happens, and the tables turn either good or bad, let's have you back on, and let's talk about kind of what you're seeing from the Green Giants perspective.
That'd be great. I'm a big fan of your show. I like listening, and so it was great to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. Bye.